Hello again, everyone. So I'm hand sanding, and that means story time, apparently. You all remember the last video that I talked about, which I will link up. I can never tell if it's going to be flipped or not. I think it's going to be up here. I'm going to make a guess when I'm recording. It's going to be up there. We'll see if I'm wrong. You're probably laughing at me now if it's wrong. Hopefully celebrating with me if I'm right. So anyway, last time I did one of these videos, one of my viewers, Jared, I think, from memory, one of Sam Town's best supporters, and has also been a wonderful supporter of my work, which I am very grateful for, asked if I would redo a video that he says he tried to do. He reckons he didn't do it justice. I watched his video and I thought it was brilliant. I liked it a lot. But nonetheless, he wanted me to do it in my words. And I will first link his video up here. I'm sticking in this corner. And basically what he was talking about was quite a deep and what I think is a poignant topic, especially nowadays. You know, the world's getting more divided. The world's seems to be a place where it's encouraged for people to pick sides and you know, screw the other guy. If they're not on your side, then they're an enemy, and people don't have open minds anymore, and they think it's us and them all the time. They got to try and find the scapegoat that they can blame for their problems. And you know, what the topic is that craftsmen, especially essential craftsmen, and by essential craftsmen I mean the craftsmen who have been necessary for society and civilization to progress. And blacksmiths fall into that category, among others. Carpenters, I would argue luthiers and people who make musical instruments progress culture. But more I'm referring to the society that we know, the civilization in which we live. Now, there have been certain professions, once again, blacksmithing included, that have been essential to this development happening. And they have independently evolved, not always independently, but largely independently evolved to exist and operate across different countries. So there are Indian blacksmiths, there are English blacksmiths, there are Scandinavian blacksmiths, there are French blacksmiths, and they discovered metals and discovered the methods to work them independently, largely, not entirely, because there's a lot of, you know, trading of information and cross-contamination and things. However, it was enough that different styles formed, and you can see it, once again, I'm only talking about blacksmithing in this instance, but you can see it in the hammers. There's French pattern hammers and Swedish pattern hammers, and the same with tongs. There's different tongs. You've probably seen the videos going around of the African style tongs and the Norse style tongs and the modern tongs that are derived from British and French style tongs. And the main point I'm getting at here is that they all do the same job. They're just done in a different way that is unique to that place. Now, you could take a blacksmith from, you know, 1500s France, or I don't know, was it Francia still back then? No, it was France. That was long after it was Francia. I'm not a great history buff. If you want history, talk to Sam Towns. You can take a blacksmith from there and pull him out and transport him over to Sweden, stick him in a forge there and put him to work, and he will be able to use all the tools. He'll be able to respond to, without even knowing the language, he'll be able to respond to the instructions of the smith, because craft has been a universal leveler. It does not require language. It does not require culture. It does not require anything other than necessity. And necessity is a universal human need. It's a thing that occurs in every culture, every country, under every language, every religion. Necessity happens, and necessity of progress, necessity of evolution of culture. And blacksmithing has been at the core of that for a large part of human history. It's been relegated to an art form now, but for almost the entirety of modern civilization, it has been a very, very essential part of becoming who we are, developing in our technologies, in our tools that we use. And because of that, it has become a part of every civilization's craft work and craftsmen. They have been there. The blacksmiths have been there. The carpenters have been there. The fishermen have been there. They all have worked out how things get done in the best possible way, most efficient way, largely independently. And even though they come up with their own styles, their own variants, they're all doing the same thing. And so because of that, you could take a blacksmith from any country in the world and put them in my shop, and I wouldn't need to be able to speak the same language as them, and they wouldn't need to speak the same language as me, because our craft is universal. And I think that that is a message that the world needs to hear, because so little of the world comes down to necessity anymore. There are large parts of the world that necessity is an important thing. There are places that are enduring horrible famine and warlords and all this sort of thing, where necessity is very much a part of life. But for a large amount of the world, we can just go to a shop and buy something if we need a tool. We don't have to worry about somebody making it for us. It's already made. It's waiting on a shelf. And so that necessity is largely gone. And yet, for such a large part of our history as human beings, that necessity has been interwoven with our way of life, regardless of culture, regardless of country, regardless of language. And by holding on to these old crafts and keeping them alive, I believe that we are keeping alive a part of our heritage, a part of our history that should be reflected in other areas of our life. That universality of need makes us all alike. It puts us all in a level playing field. And blacksmithing is a way of sort of relating that through our craft. The internet and YouTube has connected us with each other in ways that we couldn't possibly have fathomed 100 years ago, and yet we're using it. You could literally stumble into that part of YouTube where you're watching blacksmithing videos from somebody in a country that you know nothing about their culture, nothing about their language, and yet you can follow along with what they're doing because they're using the same techniques that you're using, more or less, the same tools that you're using, more or less. A really good example is that a lot of people follow Japanese swordsmiths who still do the traditional, they create the tamahagane and forge out traditional katanas, wakizashi, etc. from tamahagane. And the process is not just heavily curated in that part of the world, but it is sacred. It borders on sacred and goes well into sacred in some parts. It's so interwoven with their culture. Not every country has that, and yet, it's very different to the culture of, say, Australia or North America, and yet we can follow along with every hammer blow, and we know why they're doing it. And I think there's a lesson in that about what we do for our craft and how we operate as a community. The language of blacksmithing, if you will, is one that is worth keeping alive, if for nothing else than to set an example for the rest of the world. Food for thought, something to think about. I just got done with this little Celtic knife, ready for the Celtic festival that I'm going to in about a week's time. So I'm going to get back to finishing off a stand for this, and I'll leave you guys to it. Big thanks to my patrons for supporting my work. If you'd like to join them, links down below, along with all of my other links that you can follow me all around the place. And I'm going to leave you be. And I'll see you in the next video. Catch you later.